So, will being moral really make me happy?
Now that's a good question, but first we must consider what morality actually is.
Morals are just a particular system of values that help us to distinguish between what's right and what's wrong. They're ultimately about doing the right thing.
Fair enough, but this doesn't seem to make me happy. I mean, if I see someone's dropped some money on the floor, the moral thing to do would be to return it, right? But I'd rather just keep the money because that's what I gain the most from. So why do we go out of our ways to do these moral deeds?
Well, you see, we are very egoistic beings. It's always all about us. We behave morally not because of our unselfish concern for others around us, but because we know that, in the long term, behaving morally will actually be more beneficial to us. If we do decide to return the money, it's because we know that we will be happier by gaining the self-satisfaction of knowing that we did the right thing than we will be from the temporary happiness of taking the money.
So it is only if the satisfaction of doing the right thing will actually make me happy that I will actually do the right thing. Oh, and I guess that explains why some people don't behave morally. They don't see the long-term benefits they stand to gain.
So being moral is ultimately about the satisfaction and personal gain. This theory is called ethical egoism.
But this being philosophy, someone must disagree.
Yes, Aristotle had an alternative theory. For him, we can only be happy if we flourish as human beings.
What do you mean by flourish?
Flourishing is the interaction between intellectual, practical wisdom and virtuous actions that result in virtuous character.
So basically, humans will flourish and therefore be happy as long as they are rational and moral.
Yes, but here's the twist. For Aristotle, morality must be altruistic. This means that it must derive from our unselfish concern for those around us.
So if we act morally due to our self-interest, then we're not really acting morally.
Yes, and this is why it can't lead us to happiness, which Aristotle terms as eudaimonia.
Well, that's all good, but why does this even matter? Surely if an action benefits me as well as others, then it can only be a good thing.
Yes, this is an alternative theory called utilitarianism, and is based upon the idea that morality is the greatest happiness possible for the greatest possible number of people.
Okay, but how do you measure this happiness?
Well, in the utilitarianism theory, happiness is pleasure, and the philosopher Bentham created the hedonic calculus in order to measure the value of potential pleasure in comparison to potential pain. In his calculus, he considers 7 points. 1. Intensity, 2. Duration, 3. Certainty, 4. Remoteness, 5. Fecundity, which is a tendency to produce further pleasure or pain, 6. Purity, and 7. Extent. Bentham considered these points when determining the morality of an action. If the action will cause more pleasure than pain, then the potential pleasure side is larger than the potential pain side, so the potential pleasure side has the good tendency. We know that the action is the moral thing to do.
But this would suggest that torture would be moral if it made a greater number of people happy than unhappy. Also, going back to the money example, if the person who has lost the money is rich enough that they won't even notice his absence, but the person who finds the money is then able to provide his family with food and shelter with that money, then according to Bentham's utilitarianism theory, the good tendency would be to keep the money. But clearly, keeping the money is not the moral thing to do.
So maybe morality is actually about something other than my own happiness.
Maybe morality is not even about the happiness of those around me.
In fact, the philosopher Kant would argue that morality is not about happiness at all, but duty. For Kant, morality is not about our actions, it's about our intentions.
So for him, if we do something good, but through no fault of our own don't succeed, then this is still a good moral act because the intentions were good.
Yes, and equally, if we do something good but with bad intentions, then it doesn't count as a moral act.
Okay, so what would be an example of this?
Okay, so say a group of people are having a big party on a boat and the child falls into the sea. 2 men jump in to save him. One man, Terry, is very skinny, while the other man, George, is fat. Terry dies of cold before he can rescue the child, but George, insulated by his fat, saves the child and they both survive.
Well, putting the bizarre example aside, who would we say did the morally better thing?
Kant would argue that they both were morally equal. Although George was more successful because of his fat, both men had good intentions. These good intentions are known as the goodwill.
Okay, so as long as we have the goodwill, as in good intentions, we are moral.
Yes, and this is irrelevant of whether or not it makes us happy.
But what if I keep the money, but with the good intention to feed my starving kids? Would that still be moral?
Well, no, because the goodwill, which is the motive for our actions, must be entirely free from our self-interest. or the calculations of what the consequences could be.
Oh, so we can almost think of the goodwill as duties that we must follow, irrelevant of our personal happiness.
Yes, for Kant, this goodwill is the only truly good thing. This is why Kant would say that if we ever come across the money scenario, the moral thing to do would be to return it, no matter how desperate your urge to keep the money actually is. It's our duty not to steal, and following our duties is what really makes us moral.
And I guess the satisfaction we gain or the regret we feel simply depends on the person, but this is just completely irrelevant when it comes to any situation as such.
Yes, the only thing that really matters is doing our duty. The happiness is irrelevant when doing anything moral.